To go on. There you go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ready to Talk podcast. I am your host, Trixie, aka the Thoughtful Beast. I will start by saying it is Suicide Prevention Month. So there's a lot to say about that. But first, I just want to put that out there because that could mean many different things to many different people, just like the term suicide prevention and what that is. Before we get a little more into that, I want to point down to the scrolling bar. I was like, my hand is not in that shot. Point down to the scrolling bar. Below is the D.D. McClure San Diego Bail Fund. It's our local grassroots bail fund in San Diego. Please remember that people are still protesting, even though the news is not showing it. It's still happening, and so people need help with being bailed out. That's what we need to do for each other as a community. I will also say that Kathleen, it is Kathleen, her information is down there. That's her Instagram. So please check her out. She's here today to talk to us. And before we get into that, Kathleen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Dang. I am born and raised in San Diego. I am very involved in the Asian API community. I work for Pacific Arts Movement. We produce the San Diego Asian Film Festival. I'm also on the board of CCBA. It's one of the oldest Chinese organizations in San Diego, and we produce the San Diego Chinese New Year Fair in downtown. It's our version of the Lunar New Year Festival, but we do it right in the heart of downtown because historically that was actually the old Chinatown of San Diego in the late 1800s. So on my Instagram, I've tagged all of the organizations that I volunteer with and that I'm a part of. Just being born and raised in San Diego and starting my career here after college, I've just been really heavily involved with the API community. So be sure to follow me and see all the other projects I'm doing too.
Hello! I made it back. I was like, my thing is not reloading on my other channel, but it's okay. Thank you for joining us today, especially because, as some of you know, it's Labor Day. So this is some people's day off. So I really thank you for joining me here today. I'm totally just trying to tag you, and my Facebook does not want to find you, which is
No
really
problem.
strange, but it's okay. So here's this awkward stall that I'm doing. It will happen. It's gonna happen sometime. Maybe this time I'll win. Do you like musicals? Do you know what that's from?
Oh, no, I don't know. Is that a reference to something?
It is.
Oh, cool.
It's okay. That was how my brain worked. Okay. So again, Kathleen, thank you for joining us. So I will ask. I want to start this talk by asking you, why was it important for you to come and speak today?
It was important for me to come and speak about suicide awareness, suicide prevention, because I've been dealing with this and a various, I guess, potpourri of mental health issues ever since I was a child. And I'm turning 30 in a couple months, so it just kind of felt like a full circle moment for me to come out and speak publicly. I have written about it on my Facebook, so people in my Facebook network have seen a few things that I've written over the past couple years. I've definitely opened up to close friends. It's because I've been in an intense like therapy run for the last year and a half or so, of really getting deep into, it's not just suicide. It's not just the act of committing suicide. It's not just the ideation of it. It's what society creates for people's experiences that why do we get to that quote unquote finish line, right? It's mental health, it's lack of resources, it's domestic violence, it's substance abuse, it's all of the things that we all experience as individuals. And when unfortunately the right combination of things occur, then it can lead to somebody, hitting that mark. So I want to bring this up because it seems that people are focused on the final act, right? But yeah. I want to say, yes, we have to look at that, but we have to look at what made these people get there, because we want to prevent that. We want to see what are the parts of the equation. For example, let's see what are those little things that occurred over time that led somebody there. It's not just we have to prevent them from a dramatic like jumping off a bridge. Of course, we have to do that too, but there are people who you never know. And I know that with what I've written over the past couple years and my professional face, some people didn't realize, after I would write something on Facebook and it would get a lot of traction, and a lot of professional colleagues would come up to me afterwards and they would have no idea, because I kept such a great mask on
Yes.
to prevent people from knowing. And I think that's part of my own journey of like, okay, I know that this is something I go through, and if this will help me in my own healing if I can reveal pieces of it, because it can help someone else who's just like me, who's just as driven, like diving into work, going into volunteer service. The more we take care of other people, and the more that we forget to take care of ourselves, then the easier it is for us to fall back into our toxic habits and back into the bad cycle of activity and behavior.
Ah, yes, I agree with so much that you have said, and that one wonderful nugget of information and sharing. There's a lot that I agree with. There's a lot that I can relate to. I know we were speaking about masking a lot when we first talked, and I want to actually read your title, which is Suicide Prevention Month: Be Present and Grow Empathy. And so, I mean, I want to give my little spiel of like why I think that you chose that, and then I would love to hear like your actual thoughts about it. So when I read your title, I really liked it, because you're like, how about this one? And I'm like, I really like that, because being present and growing empathy, like for me, I'm like, yeah, that is definitely like suicide prevention. Like, how can you as a person, like who is not necessarily like a trained professional, like, can you do anything? You definitely can. You definitely can. You can, like, and that's kind of how I read your title was, oh, what are things you can do? You can be present, and you can be present and you can grow empathy, because part of it is just like, I feel like presence and awareness in your own life is really important to other people's health, but also your health as well. It's really easy for us, for ourselves, to just be like, oh, this is what I deal with day in, day out, whatever. Like, and just say whatever to a lot and have things build upon us to where we get overwhelmed. And then it's really easy to obviously check out of other people, out of like how other people are doing. And they're like, and I still do this. I try not to do this, but I still do this where someone asks me, oh, like, how are you doing? So you're like, oh, I'm doing fine. Or I'm okay. When it's just like, truthfully, a lot of times it's just like, I am not doing well. I am doing very poorly. And being present to like, does that person actually seem okay? Like, we want to trust people by their word. And I think that's a good thing to think, like, let's take people's words for it. But unfortunately, when it comes to mental health, people saying I'm fine, I'm okay is like part of a lot of people's masks, or a lot of people's way of making sure they don't burden you. Because it's a nicety, right? Like, people ask it to be polite, but it's like, not everyone actually wants to hear the answer, or, and you find that out by like when you're going like, actually, I'm not doing so well. And then their face changes, and then you go, but I'm working on it to make it better. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're trying to make it better for other people. It's so hard. And then growing empathy is just like, again, it's dual, but growing empathy for other people, trying to see like past that. Trying to see past, like, if someone all of a sudden at your job is like, starts doing like a bad job, you know what I mean? Of all of a sudden, like, they're not turning things in on time. There's all these things happening. They don't seem like they're all there at meetings, like, instead of being like, God, you just suck now. Like, what happened? It should be like, maybe something is happening. Maybe I should check up in on that person.
Yes.
Is
Yeah,
that
so
what you're going to?
yeah, definitely, because I feel like both is dual in that you have to be present for yourself and others, grow empathy for yourself and others, and I think, and sometimes, and because the lessons can be learned on both ends, because a lot of people, I think, if they've never experienced things like this, or if their own mental health journey is not as deep or is not as, I guess, open minded, and there's, toxic behaviors that people have learned over time and they think that's okay. And then when someone is like us, vulnerable, and we're talking about these things, and sometimes there's that other mindset of like, oh, like you just have to be stronger, you just have to tough it up, you just have to suck it up, and things like that, where that kind of, where they might not want to hear that mindset is actually toxic, and it's actually hurtful for people like us who need the presence, people's awareness of what may or may not be going on, and growing that empathy, because it's, but there's also another thing. I think I'm like getting my thoughts mixed up, but growing empathy means there may be a time where someone is in a vulnerable state, but they don't feel safe with you. They don't feel safe telling you exactly what's going on because you haven't earned that trust. You haven't earned, you just haven't like reached that threshold of, do you have enough empathy to take care of this person if it's the worst case scenario, right? Because there have been, there's definitely have been moments, like I think one analogy would be like when your parents get mad at you or for something, like, oh, why didn't you tell me you got pressured at a party to drink? And it's like, okay, but you're my parents. I was scared to get in trouble, therefore that's why I didn't tell you something bad happened at a party. um, it can be the same kind of situation of, you may know somebody really well, and if they don't reveal to you really serious things, it could be that, unfortunately, it's not necessarily a bad reflection on you, it's just that the connection that you two have isn't strong enough yet to handle something really serious. So I think that's definitely where the empathy can start from, because it can be a tough lesson for people to learn of like, oh, maybe I need to do a little bit more, like my level of caring isn't enough to make this person feel safe. What can I do to grow more empathy for them?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, and definitely like that growing empathy, and it's really important not to take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like in that, like, oh, like how come our friendship isn't good enough? And it's just like, because when you say strong enough, it doesn't necessarily mean like your friendship is even like bad. It
Mm-hmm.
can be really strong, but like strong enough means like a lot of different things. It's like partially it's like, is this person also just ready?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they just ready? Like, are you strong enough to actually wait for that? Like, growing empathy is part of that. You have to be patient.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have friends who I've been friends with since like middle school. And I think they know about my mental illnesses and mental health issues because I do stuff like this, but I have never talked to them like straight on about it ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, and it's just it's really, it takes a lot. I feel like for me personally, it takes a lot out of me to talk about my mental health issues. It takes a lot, and it takes a lot of trust for me to ever talk about like suicide and
Mm-hmm.
my experiences with that. Just because there's so much guilt tied for me, but then there's also, I know there's a stigma,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yep.
and sometimes, sometimes you say things like in passing that let's say like my friend says something in passing like 2 years ago, something like about like, oh, like people commit suicide, like that's like, I don't even just get it, like it's so weird,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I'm like, I tried to commit suicide, and it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I've never, I never told you, so you don't know
Mm-hmm.
that, so I know you're not trying to hurt me, but like that's
Mm-hmm.
something I'm going to keep,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in my mind. And so like you also can't take it personally, because like there's stuff like that. It doesn't mean like you're a bad friend, it doesn't necessarily mean all that, but like gaining that trust and also having enough empathy is it's also good for you too, because if
Mhm.
you don't have enough empathy to handle all this coming at you, like
Mhm.
it's not going to go well for everyone.
Right.
Like if you're, if you don't know how to be open yet,
Mhm.
or if you're not even ready yet to be that kind to yourself,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
are you even that kind to yourself? Like, if you were suicidal, would you beat yourself up about that? And like that's that's understandable too, but it's just like, well, how would that mindset help your friend right now?
Mhm.
If you're gonna think about, if you're hypothetically thinking about that about yourself now,
Yeah.
then it's just like, oh, then
Yeah.
maybe you're not ready yet.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely it is the stigma about mental health. I think especially because I'm involved in the API community, it's a deep ingrained cultural thing too, to deal with mental health in toxic ways, and to address mental health issues in really dramatic ways that don't necessarily solve the problems, right? It doesn't necessarily address the problems head on, because we could just kind of, yeah, there's just the cultural background of it too, of all those things tied together, like culture and how we're raised and the community that we're around and how we treat ourselves personally. Like that can be a perfect storm, right, to lead to even more severe mental health issues.
That's so true. Like, um, yeah, like being Filipino for myself, there's a lot of feeling of duty. There's a lot of like feeling of like duty, and then also like, well, I guess that's part of duty, but like duty slash burden of just like, oh, like, well, my parents immigrated and they gave me all these different things. Like, I really need to now, be able to provide a future for myself and them.
Hmm.
Right? Like a lot, like, like my parents have definitely like straight up said, like, well, who's taking care of us when we get old? And I think my brother and I were just like, uh, like, this is a horrible conversation, like,
Hmm.
and those things are really hard. Like
Hmm.
those, like you're so right, like that cultural expectation on top of just like normal life, because
Hmm.
that cultural expectation like definitely like shifts the way you think, right? Like for
Hmm.
me personally, like being a dancer, being an artist felt very much like, I'm definitely just straight up letting my family down. I'm letting my family down because, art
Hmm.
isn't necessarily the biggest money maker.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So, like just having that added pressure, like I know for me, that's one of the things that all like, especially when I was like, when you're at your lowest, the things that just like always kept nagging at you, even when you were
Hmm.
okay, like, they
Hmm.
really get to you when
Hmm.
you're at your lowest. So I remember those feelings of guilt, really for me, that really contributed to my feelings of helplessness and suicidal ideation.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And it's a and I think what's important to know is that people who have experienced this, it's never going to it's never going to go away. You're never, I think unfortunately people are never really cancer free, and people are never really suicide free. Like, you would never really hear from somebody say, "Oh, I'm cured. I'm not suicidal anymore." That will never come out of my mouth for sure, because we all have our own individual set of triggers that remind us of those times, because our body and our mind remembers everything that we've done to ourselves. So we're just going to spend the rest of our lives making sure that if we relive those moments again, or if a new moment occurs, that it doesn't end our life, right? But because our body and our mind have that muscle memory of remembering, like we were almost there, like we almost did it, like we almost completed it, right? But we'll keep living on, making sure that we stop. Or unfortunately, some people do end up committing suicide even after years of treatment and everything. So that's why I think it's important for our people in our community to be present with us, be patient and present with us. You don't necessarily have to rescue us. I think it's more of just being there and being open to learning, and being open to being empathetic and understanding it, because what we are going through, we're going to deal with this every single day for the rest of our lives.
It's so interesting because like the way you think about that is just like how I think about personally like my mental illnesses, right? Because like when I think of when I personally think of suicide, I think of that as like a range for where my depression can hit, right? Suicidal ideation for me, like I think of it like, yeah, that's when like my depression like is really 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 bad. Like it's a range, it's like a spectrum. And so in that way, like, you know, I feel like I can say like, oh, it's been like freaking 4 years since I thought about suicide, like realistically, or like as a thing. But like the thing that happens every so often too is like, you know, that question like just does pop in and out of my head where it's just like, do I even like deserve to live right now though? Like, is this even worth it though? You know, and it'll be like a passing thought. And I try to be like, okay, I had that thought. Maybe I need to like, I use that as a signal to be like, I got to really like look into my mental health. And then sometimes I have to think of it as that's a knee-jerk response of a behavior pattern that I had forever, which is like a lot to say, but like it is like unfortunately, one of my coping mechanisms for poor mental health was basically like, oh, let's just end it. Like those thoughts were my coping mechanism, which is just like a really, really, a really bad coping mechanism. But like, that's how I worked for a really long time. So even though right now, I don't feel constantly suicidal, but I still have those thoughts pop in every so often. And again, like it really signals me to be like, I need to look at my mental health right now. Because which one is it? Is this like this knee-jerk like pattern that's just like, you know, still ingrained somewhere and I just got to work on that a little bit? Or is like, or am I not okay? Like, which one is it?
Yeah, definitely. And that only occurs, that kind of meta or that kind of self-awareness doesn't happen until we actually have like until we've made strides in our own mental health journey, if we've made adjustments, if we've made progress in some kind of way to realize that. And unfortunately, I feel like we're both similar in that we didn't find actual help until we were like very much into adulthood. Whereas dealing with this from childhood until you're 18 is a chaotic like a chaotic, like apocalyptic time in itself, and not knowing how to deal with it until college, until we're finally in like a safer mindset, or we're finally we had to find the resources ourselves, right? It was never a resource that was necessarily taught or given to us or provided to us as children. And I think that is a major like it stunts a lot of people's mental health growth, right? We can all grow physically, academically, in skills, but mental illness and how to deal with your own mental health problems, because everybody has mental health problems. We cannot deny that people, like, no one's perfect in their own mental health. Therefore, if there are people who never got to work on their mental health as children up until adulthood, then their growth is stunted when they get into adulthood, when they get into a career, go get a job and go get married and have children. If there's unresolved issues from your childhood, I know that can kind of sound cliche, but it's true. If there's something that happened in your childhood that doesn't get resolved, then you're going to carry it with you when you're an adult.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. And I was, when you were saying that, I was just thinking of, a lot of Asians and Pacific Islanders like talk about, you know, like we don't make a lot of choices for ourselves. Like our parents make a lot of our choices for us, like even into our 20s, for some of us, even into our like 30s and 40s, like our decisions are not our own. We genuinely feel like our decisions are not our own. And that's, I know that's a big cultural thing. And then it's just like, what happens though? Like when, like, even like you said, right, going from a child who like never makes decisions for themselves, like say you go into college and like, you know, your parents made those decisions for you anyways, but like, what do you do with all the decisions like in front of your face that you have to make because they're not there? Like, not having that confidence, not knowing how to
Mhm.
make decisions for yourself and actually know what's important to you is crippling. It can be freaking crippling and so stressful.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
what I-
totally. Yeah, that's like that's where the anxiety and like being indecisive comes from. You know, just the extreme indecisiveness is because, you know, because we're so conditioned to just follow whatever somebody else is doing. Um and it's not that we don't want to have opinions, it's that it's almost like we're scared to have opinions as an
Yes.
adult. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yes. So how was it for you being younger and experiencing suicidal ideation without that support? Without, being taught mechanisms or even without the support of like your family, maybe even just like acknowledging mental health.
Mhm. I mean, I have a I have a loving relationship with my family members, and I'm really grateful for that. And uh, I think it's been interesting to experience life as all of the siblings are all adults, where now we're having really serious conversations about our own personal experiences as children. Because when we're all children together, we're all just trying to survive, our household. We're just trying to be good kids, and follow the like birth order things, like listen to the oldest sibling, stuff like that, and do our chores and everything, and take care of our parents. But it's interesting in that I have had really serious conversations with my siblings, because now we're all adults. And it's like, hey, did you know I went through this when I was in sixth grade? It's like, oh no, I didn't realize that, and I'm happy to say that all of us are healthier mentally. Like, we've all had our own individual journeys with mental health, and we were all able to find the resources on our own as adults. um it does feel sad of like hearing something that happened to a sibling when they were younger and they didn't have any support, because it's like the 80s, right? And like there's no there culturally there wasn't that kind of support for Asian kids back then. But like it's nice to see that now everyone is an adult that is taking care of themselves, taking care of their family. um so there's even still things that I don't think we've all shared everything with each other. I know we've all started to, but I think as we grow older as adults, of like, okay, now it feels safe to bring up things that occurred in the past. So there's even some things that, yeah, I write about, and things that I talk about publicly to, to the internet network like Facebook and everything. There are items that I don't discuss with my family members, or I have not discussed with my family members. They just kind of find out by reading my Facebook. And I hope personally that it doesn't hurt them. I hope that they just know that this is a personal outlet for me, that because I'm active in the community, I write and speak about certain things to affect everyone that I'm involved with. And I hope that they don't take offense that I never told them personally, because I think our family relationships are resilient enough that will talk about personal things like when it's the right time.
Yeah. Oh man. Um, I'm so glad you have that with your siblings and your
Mhm.
family. It's so funny because for me, I'm just like, I don't talk to my family about this. Like, not my immediate family. Well,
Mhm.
really not a lot of my family. Like my god sisters, my brother knows some stuff, but like with my parents and aunts and uncles and stuff, it's really weird because part of me is like, me doing all this stuff publicly is kind of the way I'm slowly telling them. Because I'm not,
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
release it and be like, I'm sharing this with my mom. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to do that. Like, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
But I know at some point I'm going to like, it's either just going to happen organically or I'm going to have to make like a very like, woo choice,
Mhm.
like a very like definite choice. Also,
Yeah.
depending like I don't know how you feel like or how much you talk about your family, but that's like the hard part because for me I'm like the family trauma is a lot of my trauma. you know, or there's things that are related to it, but it
Mm.
always feels weird because sometimes it's just like, dude, this is not my story.
Yeah.
But it's a big part of my story. So how do I resolve that? How am I supposed to talk and be as truthful as I can? And also not tell someone else's story. Like, it's so hard because it's just like, especially when you're, you know, especially when it's your family, like that's your family, you know, and you
Yeah.
like, a lot of us like want to protect them. And then also
Yeah.
though, just being like, but if I can't speak to A, B, or C, then there's this big part of my life that doesn't make sense then. There's no context.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad that you have that. And going back to what you were saying earlier, right? Like Kathleen was talking about, you know, safety and building that empathy and that presence, being present, but also just like, again, don't take it super personally because, right, like it took her a long time to be able to tell like her siblings, and she doesn't always tell them now. I'm struggling with still, you know, telling. So it's not like, it's not something that you should feel offended at, but it's also definitely something like Kathleen's been saying that you can super prepare for, which is beautiful, really.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Ooh, and so why did you start writing publicly about your experiences, your mental health experiences and your experiences with suicidal ideation?
Well, I started writing because the most recent like event that is pinpointed from, you know, I've been in therapy for PTSD for the last year and a half, and the most recent event was because I held a job that was very public in the API community, and I'm no longer at that job. So um, there's a whole can of worms with that, and a lot of people met me because of that public job, and then there's a group of people who met me afterwards. And so because of all the trauma and pain and just things that I witnessed, and the reality is that that was my dream job. That was what I went to school for. That was what I was preparing for, like fell in love with that field. And similarly, unfortunately, to military PTSD, because I'm in PTSD, and I do have kind of a military background, that a lot of the similar um, symptoms and attributes of military PTSD is that it's people um, who invest all of their time and energy into the war, into their fight, into their job and serving the country. Similarly, that's what I did to myself. I gave everything into that job, and now I'm not there. And that is what led me to have my most recent, like time period of suicidal ideation, because I was no longer at that job. I felt like I had nothing else to live for because that was literally my job and like my life for so long, and I worked at it as if I was a soldier. So that kind of that like breed of PTSD really affected me and led me to be suicidal. And so because I was in such a really tragic period of my life for a good like a couple of months, and coming out of it and finally healing, finding a safer workplace, finding, pulling myself out of that and letting go of that job experience and letting go of that phase of my life. I have to realize that was a dream job for back then. I have to move on. And because now I'm in that moving on phase, that's just part of the journey of, okay, I need to reveal to people what I experienced, because people don't know how bad the transition was. Sometimes when people transition from job to job, it can be really nice of like, oh, I found better opportunities. But my transition was the complete opposite. And I needed the community to know that, because my job before and my jobs now are very public. I wanted the community, especially the API community, to understand that my job transition was extremely difficult, and I didn't make it. Like, I almost didn't make it because of how devastating that was.
Yeah, I mean, oh, man, who to lose, to feel like you've lost your dream job is such like a big loss, especially when you add in, like you were saying, you were mind, body, soul devoted to this thing, right? You were everything was about that job. And I think some people who just don't understand yet, maybe who are working on their empathy still, would just be like, it's just a job, like it's just a job. But that's the thing, like you can't, it's always more complicated to that, like it's easy to be like, oh yeah, it's just a job. And it's just like, no. You need to look at, like, Kathleen put her whole entire life into this job, like this, because it sounds like basically this was a big chunk of your identity. Like your job, like this was your identity, and it was your dream job, but you actually worked towards it and you got it. And a lot of people don't even get that in like their life. They just don't get their dream job. And so that amount of loss mixed in with, like, for something with that like dedication, like, loss and grief, like that's, that can be like a risk factor for suicide, right? Like just like loss, if you like lost something, like, and that could be like a dream job, it could be your job, it could be your family, right? Or it could be like, it could be like a family member or a loved one too. Like loss means a lot of things. And it's not, I don't think it's correct to like gatekeep what kind of loss is like, what, like when people are like, well, that's not enough to feel that way. It's just like, you can't gatekeep that for people because you don't understand how they work and you don't know their lives. And, you can't, it's not like you can like touch something and be like, oh, that doesn't feel that bad, like you can't. And also you shouldn't do that even if you can, but like, it's not helpful and people don't understand that, like, that is a big loss. Like people might just think it's a job, but it's not, like it's more than that. And again, which is what got you to that point, right? The context around things, like the things like and I mean, I have PTSD too, so I understand a little more, but it's just like, it's so clear when you, and it's such like, for me, it's such like a culture thing too, right? Like just like devoting yourself to that one thing, like just like devoting yourself, right? Like say for a lot of people, it might be family, right? Like devoting yourself to your family. Like if you devote yourself so much and then you identify so much as like being this specific part of that family, contributing a very specific thing, what happens when you lose that? Like what happens when you lose yourself? That's very, very difficult. And I think for some people it's like, oh, empty nester syndrome or whatever, but it's just like, no, this could be like, yes, but also this could be like way more than that. Like depending on what rules people lost, what if they feel like they have like another reason to live, really. Right, like a lot of time, like people are just like, oh, it's family, and everything is built off of that one idea. And then what happens, like, if you can't help your family, or what happens if you don't feel like you're helping your family, right? Like, quote unquote, you don't feel like you're enough. What happens then? Then you're in a dangerous place.
Yeah, totally. It feels like, you really hit the nail on the head. I think my therapist said that, and that your previous job was part of your identity. It's like who you were as a person. Like if someone did some soul aura reading on you, it would list your job title because that's how dedicated you were to that. And I think and where does that mindset come from, right? Because then there's other people who say, oh, well, it's just a job. Why did you take that job so seriously? But it's like, that's all I knew. Like I only knew how to take every single job seriously, every role I've done, everything all the organizations I'm involved with, I take it all really seriously, to the point where it becomes unhealthy, right? Or to the point where it becomes overworking, overexerting, overachieving, to the point where it's toxic, and like, and my actions created the situation for it to hurt me even worse than it did, right? Because I guess like my personality, or like how I was raised, made me dedicate way more than the job deserved in the end, right? How we're raised and how we're taught to go the extra mile, even if you don't get paid extra for certain things, and then a job situation can take advantage of you, um, uh, and not pay you and not compensate you correctly, or jobs or managers can be toxic. People can just expect more out of you without having to give you, giving you any rewards out of that, because our personalities are always been driven, keep your head down and do everything, without asking for rewards, right? And that leads into a toxic mindset, because then as soon as we go into another job situation where we're like where you're compensated better, the managers care about your mental health, you're like, what kind of job is this? I didn't know this existed. And then it turns into the negative speak of like, do I really deserve this? Do I deserve it, like
Ooh.
a 4-day weekend, when, or do I deserve this raise?
Oh my
and
gosh,
and
yes.
and so, my current boss now, he knows about, because I'm still working in the API community, so a lot of people do know me from before and after, right? And so my boss now knows my whole mental health journey, because he was there, like, because he hired me when I was in the middle of that transition, and I told him, I was like, can I take time off to go to PTSD therapy? And he's like, go for it, and he knows and understands everything. But there's even some conversations where he's like, great job on this. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure I did a great job? You know? Or he's like, take the rest of the day off. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, do I deserve this day off? And he's like, are you kidding me? Like, you've done all the work that you can do today. You should take a day off. And that sometimes that still feels foreign to me, because I spent X amount of years at the previous job where nothing was rewarded, but my reward was I was in my dream job and doing everything I wanted, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to transition into a healthier space, and unlearn these toxic behaviors, unlearn these activities that contributed to a really difficult transition.
Oh man. Oh, okay. So there's a lot to say about that and ask
Yeah.
about that. I mean, because it's so like when we think about suicide prevention, right? It's just like basically like how do we make healthier spaces for everyone? How do we get out of this culture where basically you're supposed to work yourself to death to barely get anything? And the whole time, no, you're not going to be made to feel like you're good enough, even though like you're working your little butt off, but there are a lot of unhealthy workspaces out there, again, like that's kind of part of our culture. It's like hustle culture for no money. And so it's like addressing those things, like that addresses suicide. Like if we address, like if we need to go back, right? Like the prevention is like, we need to go back to like why these things are starting. Like what environments are we setting up that make it easier for the path like to suicide to be built? It's just like, what are we letting go? What are we saying to each other is okay? What are we saying to like our children to make it okay that like you have to grow up where you feel helpless or hopeless or not, or you feel worthless if you don't accomplish X, Y, and Z, right? Like the feeling worthless thing is just like that. Like it's so real. Yeah, it's just so real. And I mean, I'm assuming like that loops into your feelings of losing your identity, right? It's like those feelings of worthlessness. And so I guess my question will be like, how did you start to address that?
I think how I started to address it, I mean, initially starting to address it in a healthy way was I just finally needed to go to therapy. I couldn't, because I was identifying the effects, like the chain reaction effects of being severely depressed, severely suicidal, because then that turned into drug and alcohol abuse, that turned into being a terrible friend, being a bad roommate, being a bad wife. It just led into a chain reaction of negative behaviors that I was letting myself do, or I was indulging in, right? I was indulging in these negative behaviors because I didn't know how else to feel. Because at least I was finally feeling something different. Because it's either I feel like I want to die, or at least I can be drunk for a while, right? And so that I don't have to think about what happened. I don't have to think about what happened in the last couple of years. I don't have to think about what happened in the last couple months, because life was just not, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And I had to find it for myself but having to experience months and months of hurting myself, beating myself up, and being in the worst state of mind, like physically, mentally, emotionally. So it is that phrase of like, when you reach your lowest point, that's when you can finally see the light, and that's when you can finally change. So yeah, so I had to ride this really dangerous roller coaster for an extended period of time, and then finally, when I had enough of that roller coaster, then I could be like, okay, here's an appointment for a therapist. Find a therapist. Like, that's my to-do list. Call a therapist, make an appointment. Get rid of all the alcohol in the house, and tell somebody else, like, finally say to somebody else, like, dude, I need help. And then allowing other people in to help me, because there's a small handful of people who were there for me, who became present for me when they didn't know the details. They were just there, like, just being present, like, hey, let's go get coffee. And then they would just tell me about daily life and just fill me in. And then them being present for me in, like, kind of like a spontaneous moment. Like, unfortunately, that can't happen right now with like COVID times, but them being present, pulling me out of my house to go hang out for an hour, it like was like the highlight of the day sometimes. And a lot of those people I am closer with now, because I have been able to tell them, and like tell them specifically, like, hey, the fact that you reached out to me in a time where I felt like nothing was worth it, like, that helped me get through another day. So that's how those were like the little breadcrumbs that I used to finally get help and get out of that extended period of the roller coaster.
Yeah. Oh, and support is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I always feel like one of my biggest pieces of advice, if anyone always like asks me about like mental health issues or depression or whatever, I'm like, if you can build the biggest support system you can, like, always, like, especially when you're doing well, really build that support system, because it is important to have like those things, right? Because sometimes it's really, so when Kathleen and I are talking, right, it's really, I feel like it's easier for us at this time, because like this is kind of like our past, like we're looking back and reflecting. And so it's easier for us to be like, well, I now know that I was doing this, right? Like, I was doing X, Y, and Z. I was coping horribly by doing this, and this. And we can see it easily now. But when you are in that headspace of hopelessness and helplessness, it is very hard. It is very hard to like see clearly, and it is very hard to see clearly enough to pull yourself out. It's not impossible. Yeah. I mean, part of the reason why, like, at least for me, I can speak for myself. Part of the reason why I do better now is because I've accumulated skills through therapy. Like, I just didn't have any skills to deal with it. Like, I didn't have any. And if you're not raised, and we don't talk about mental health enough. No one does. Like, for like, as a child, like as a teenager, as a young adult, like, I wasn't raised with those skills of how to cope, So it's just like, I can now, because now I have more of them. But when you're in it and you don't have those skills yet, it's very hard to pull yourself out. So having a support system, having people who will be like, yeah, let's go out and get some coffee today, right? Like, can mean a freaking world of difference. Even even if they're not even necessarily trying, but like, you know,
Yeah.
when someone is like, we're gonna, you know, like, Kathleen, I don't care. We're getting coffee. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
like knocking on your door and like, girl,
Yeah.
I'm here. I am here. Like
Mhm.
sometimes that like means a lot because we don't, it's hard to have that energy for yourself
Oh yeah.
to be
Yeah.
like, I need to ask
That's true.
someone so I can get out of my house and just have a cup of coffee. It can be so difficult that way. So like, I'm glad you had friends who would help you like that because it is so important to have a support system. And I always say like the bigger the better because it helps you alleviate that feeling of like, oh, I'm a burden, you know, or at least for
Yeah.
me, like, because it's just like, oh, okay, well, I'm not overwhelming other people, like, or if I feel like, oh, maybe if I've been talking to this person too much, like maybe I can talk to this person, you know, so like I don't feel like person A is getting overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you feel that, like, especially with your significant other. Like, I know, like, I feel that where it's just like, you know, like my boyfriend, like I live with him. He's gonna see a lot of what other people don't see. And so it's just like you know, if I don't want to feel like a burden, then for me, it's just like I need to build my support system so I have other people to talk to, and I'm not just like this, like
Yeah.
at him.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. That's what I had to do too, and I'm really grateful for that because you know, in the worst time, I live with my husband and we live alone now, but before my best friend lived with us. She shared our apartment. And you know, I have to give a shout out to her because she saw it happening in real time, and she and I really relate on these personal issues. Like, we've been best friends for since high school, so she knew that something bad was happening, and she essentially staged an intervention. She staged an intervention and really, like, it that was like the major thing that snapped me into a clear state of mind, because it was just darkness. And 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 I'm really lucky to have that, because I don't think, you know, I've been with my husband for almost 15 years, and as much as I know that he's strong, but I know that you're right, and that there's like a burden, and there's also he has to help keep house too. Like, he has to work and take care of things, and he wasn't at home with me when I was unemployed and in my transition time. So that's why my best friend witnessed more of it, because he was just trying to keep us afloat, right? And my best friend was there to step in when it was needed. And then, you know, the people, the associates and the colleagues that I've made over time in the community, they came in, and I came in and was like, hey, you want to get boba? You know, haven't seen you, like, hope you're doing okay. And it was just those little gestures meant a lot. Big gestures mean a lot, and I'm grateful for every single person that stepped in, because if I was just alone, completely alone, or if I was just alone with my husband, I don't think that we would have been strong enough to, like, make it through that. So the people, people and in their groups, if you can learn how to be present, and if you can learn how to have more empathy for people, especially if they've been open about their mental health issues, and if you're open to learning better communication skills, because even, like you had mentioned like a while ago, of like a little trigger of, oh, people committing suicide is dumb or whatever, like even little, you know, backhanded comments like that can instantly put you on the do not trust list, in not necessarily a bad way. It's just more of, who are the people in my life I can share mental health details with? Who are the people who can respect me in my mental health journey? And who are people who may not understand that yet?
Yeah, it's defense, not offense. It's you protecting
Hmm.
yourself, not trying to attack
Yeah.
someone because it's like, oh, well, they said this about mental health or whatever. It's just like, no, it becomes protecting yourself.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's hard. It's a
Hmm.
it's a hard it's hard. It's a hard life to live. It really is. Oh my God. It's already 6:25. I'm gonna say that it's gone by really quickly. There's so much I still want to ask you, but I mean, like, this has been really nice. Talking about suicide and suicidal ideation is really difficult. I love that, again, you keep referencing back to your title of basically being present, growing empathy, because that's just, it's part of like just creating a better world, and it's also part of creating a kinder humanity. Like it's been, 2020 has not been the kindest of years. And so like even now I feel like it's more important to be like, how do you become more empathetic? How do you become more understanding? What are those times when you're just being kind of casually unkind just because, like, whatever, like, and like, and really like looking at like, why is it okay to be casually unkind and whatever? Like, is that really what you want to do? Like, where is this coming from? Like, do you think this is helpful? I'm not saying like you can't, sometimes we're grouchy and that happens and we'll say things, but also just like learning how to really mean what you say is important. Really learning to listen and trying to understand where everyone is coming from, being loving and kind and compassionate. Again, that empathy, like, I think it's super important. So I love how you keep drawing it back to that. Hey, girl. It's really nice. I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
Purposeful. I guess, okay, so we're reaching the end here. So I will ask you this question, and it's really open-ended, but I want to ask you this question. Is there anything that you want to say that you just haven't gotten to talk about within this hour? Is there anything you want to, say to people who are maybe either dealing with feeling suicidal right now, or or to anyone who is trying to support someone who is suicidal right now?
Okay. I think one thing that I want to, I guess, like my soapbox, right, is the being present, growing empathy. It takes a lot of work. It's not hard. It's not easy. But the person who is struggling just wants to feel understood I guess we want to feel understood on our own terms in however we want to express ourselves emotionally. And it's important to make sure that, I guess, there's kind of a pornographic feeling that some people can get of suicide, of like celebrity suicides, or really traumatizing dramatic events, right? And the people can, I guess, like the average person who doesn't have presenting mental health issues can be like, oh, they tried to jump off a bridge, or oh, they tried to overdose, and focus too much on those gory details instead of trying to support that person, like before the event or even after the event, of like, we need to help this person and address all of the background issues of mental health, of why what was their depression or anxiety, what were the things that were leading up to this. Because I do want to, like, because I have written about this, it's you may not know who is affected by this and who's silently suffering because of the strong stigma. And so when people just focus on the tragic, gory details without talking about the context and trying to support the person going through their whole journey of getting there, then it can really miss the mark and it can really hurt people. I think for me personally, over these last couple years, there are some people that are no longer in my life because I felt like they were just focused on my like end game, right? They were just focused on this, or it even almost felt like because I wasn't doing anything extreme, because I hadn't hurt myself that put myself in the hospital, that they thought I was okay. So there's kind of a double-edged sword there of oh, well, you have a new job now and you seem so much happier, and like you must be cured. And that's never the case. Um, and and then there's other people who felt like, oh, because I haven't had some kind of episode lately, then I must be fine too. Or, or I'm only going to talk to her if she tells me something extreme. Because if you say, hey, I'm just having a hard day, and then you tell someone and they're like, that's not hard enough, or like, why can't you just, that's nothing. That's nothing compared to what you experienced before. So why get hung up? Like, I think the there's that phrase like, don't sweat the small stuff, but sometimes the small stuff really hurts. So I'm going to sweat over it, or I'm going to I'm going to have anxiety over something, whether it's really small or really big. And so it's more of, people can be very dismissive without realizing it, and that's where the empathy comes in. You have to realize, if the things that you're saying or doing, or your opinions about something, can be dismissive and can hurt people. So hopefully people can be more self-aware of how they interact with people with mental illness, and be careful of the toxic comments that they can say. Yeah.
Oh, yes, you're so right. And it's so interesting because there is that, like, I shared a similar viewpoint and I saw something on Reddit where someone was basically saying, like, I hate that when, it's September, Suicide Prevention Month, it comes to this month, everyone's like, oh, remember to check on your friends. And it's like, how come it's not going past just check on your friends? And also, why are you waiting for Suicide Prevention Month? Or like, why are you waiting till you feel like someone might be suicidal to check in on them? Like, it is really hard that way. And that's the thing, like, again, with like masking, like we don't, like, I don't, like, I know I still mask a lot. I'm realizing I still mask way more than I actually even think I'm masking, which is weird because I'm like, man, I must have been like masking 24/7 or something. Right. Like, but it's so important to have that empathy and just like understand, things aren't always the way they seem. Like that phrase like exists for a reason. Like that saying exists for a reason. People say it a lot. You'll never know what's going on in someone else's life. And so it's just like, you don't, and it is a reason to be kind, and even if they're doing well, check in on your friends who you think are doing well. Like they still need like love and support. It is really weird when people like what you said, like you have to be doing bad, like so bad that I feel like I need to check in on you. And it's like, what is that? Like, that's so weird. Like, I'm not worthy of your time unless I'm gonna kill myself. Like, that is weird. Like, that is not okay. And I think therefore, like, it's really smart for you, and it's smart for everyone to, think about, like, who are you allowing in your life, especially if you you struggle with your mental health, or you have problems, like you might not exactly be diagnosed with a mental illness, but if you're struggling, the people around you, their words, their energy, like it makes a difference. And that difference can go either way. So it's really important to surround yourself with people that you can trust.
Totally. Yes.
There's just like so much, like part of me just wants to be like, like I want to rage because like I totally understand, and it's so weird. Is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything else you want to add? Because that was really good, and I just like that piece of advice.
Oh, thank you. It's something, like I mentioned this earlier, it's something that we're going to deal with for the rest of our lives. So you're right, you can't just check on your friends every September, like you wouldn't check on a cancer survivor every like February for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. You check on them consistently. And so yes, like I know the intent is there and it's good, but if you do truly want to invest in your friends, you have to be consistent. Like consistency is key for a lot of things, and that is also being a good friend. So if you want to, and sometimes that's not for everybody, right? It can be, I think that for me personally, I have invested all of my time in a lot of other people. So I know my limits now, or like I'm saying no to projects more often than I'm saying yes because I don't want to overwork myself. And that's the same thing with friendships. Like if there are friendships that I can't manage, then I have to slowly like grow out of them or let them go. So I want to make sure the people who want to take care of me are also on that same kind of accountability of like, if I appreciate your thoughts, like don't, like take your time and learn how to be a good friend to me. I don't want to force people to go all in and try and figure out my damage and everything. Like people can learn how, like we can grow together. We can have empathy. You can learn how to have empathy for me like on your own time, because I know that it can be really exhausting. So that's why like my close friends, like I can count them on like one or two hands, because they chose to take the time to learn about me and like from me about my mental health, and that's it. And I'm not trying to be greedy and have more friends after that, because I know how hard it is to be a close friend to me in the first place. Um, so it's more of, I think if more people can have a baseline understanding of, here's how, if I see somebody having a hard time, here's how I can be better present, or here's how I can have a little bit more empathy and have more patience with somebody, then that will be, that'll be a helpful chain reaction. Because I want to like get rid of those toxic comments out of our culture of like, oh, you're too strong, you should just be strong, be strong and get over it, like those comments are counterproductive. They are not helpful. We have to have more kinder statements that we can say to people. We have to let go of this, like it's a toxic like strength. It's like, I guess it is kind of rooted in toxic masculinity, but also like, yeah, it's just toxic like strength, like over exerting strength, that can be really harmful for people struggling with mental health. Because if we're sitting here dealing with mental health issues, then our brain is hella strong, right?
Yeah.
We're not weak because we have mental health problems. It's the opposite. We're strong because we are dealing with mental health problems and also dealing with ignorant people at the same time, right?
Yep.
So
And we're
it's
still alive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's trying to get rid of those toxic phrases, because I know how much they hurt me. Of when people would say, "Oh, just be strong and hang in there, and you'll get through it," or tough it out, suck it up, like that. That is, a lot of that negative. A lot of that is not healing. It's just negative. Like it's almost like negative, like uh, suppression of mental health are those phrases. So I want to remove that from, like, big goal is like for people to stop finally using that kind of negative language.
Yeah, for sure. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Yeah, and thank you for coming on to talk today. I felt like that was a lot of good things that I hope more and more people hear. And I'm so glad that, like, shout out to your future podcast with your brother. Like, and I know it's not going to be about mental health, but I'm glad you get another platform to speak. Also, I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that you also, do your own writing about this too, because that's so powerful. So thank you for that as well. I want to say again, look at that, scroll down and you'll find Kathleen's IG. If you want to, connect with her, if you want to see the kind of stuff that she does, it's next to our D.D. McClure San Diego Bail Fund, which is our local grassroots bail fund in San Diego. If you can donate, please consider donating to them to help our protesters. And it is Suicide Prevention Month. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this talk and you got a lot out of it. And I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, like, I'm pretty sure, you know, if you guys have questions, like Kathleen and I, you can like message us, because it's suicide's hard. Suicide prevention, like the whole topic is like really difficult to talk about. So yeah, so again for the third, fourth, or fifth time, thank you for being here, because even though this is something I know you're passionate about speaking to, I know that doesn't mean it's easy to speak about.
Yeah,
like that's not the same. Like,
right.
Just because you're passionate about something, like, it doesn't mean it's easy. So, you know, thank you for investing your energy in this, and your knowledge and experience. It really does mean a lot. This is a really hard month for some people, me included. So, you know, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you for inviting me and providing that platform. And you're right in that it is extremely hard. If we didn't have the right energy when we met last week, then I would have said no, right? Because
Yeah.
this kind of conversation and meeting people and just knowing and just feeling if it's the right energy or if it's an unsafe energy, then we can just shut down and just clam up and be like, never mind, I don't want to talk to this person because this person doesn't give me the right vibes, right, of that. So so I feel very safe talking to you about this, and I feel really honored to be sharing this on, through your show, because I think the energy is right here, and the outreach that hopefully this will be really important, even if it's to just, the couple of friends who are supporting us and watching. I hope that they can listen to our experiences and learn a little bit more, because there's always more to learn as we're trying to navigate life, and especially during COVID times. I'm sure all of our therapists are going to be making extra money because of people in their COVID times, right?
Yes.
So yes, so there's definitely so much more to learn, and our own personal journeys too. Because things can always change. So if we can keep working on ourselves to change for the better with our network behind us, then that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Oh, if you want to hear more from Kathleen, again, check her out down there at her Instagram. My Instagram is The Thoughtful Beast. Most of my things, if you just type in The Thoughtful Beast, you'll find me. But yeah, if you want to find more about Kathleen, please check down there. It's scrolling down there. And until next time, I hope every one of you listening right now and everyone who'll be listening in the future, I hope that you take care of yourselves. I hope you grow empathy for others and yourself. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and night, or wherever you are. Bye.